Welcome to Powerless to Powerful with Angela Bennett, a show that brings a sassy mix of transformative advice on health, relationships, love, career, and mindset shifting, together with some fun and laughter. Powerless to Powerful with Angela Bennett begins now. Well, welcome back to Powerless to Powerful. It is so wonderful to have you. Today, I have my amazing and stunning guest for those who are on video. Her name is Carmen. Carmen was born in Mexico and raised by her grandmother. She faced an unforeseen permanent transition to the United States at the tender age of just 15. Despite language barriers and cultural adjustments, she found solace in writing, keeping connections strong with loved ones back home. Overcoming hurdles, she completed high school and pursued an associate's degree in social and behavioral science, deepening her understanding of the human mind and society's influence. Battling anxiety, depression, and substance abuse, Carmen emerged as a survivor, dedicating herself to empowering others through transformative writing. As a best-selling author, she exemplifies the indomitable spirit, triumphing over adversity, inspiring others to persevere and overcome life's challenges. Coach Carmen Cadena, welcome to Powerless to Powerful.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited, a little bit nervous, but more than anything, I'm so honored. So thank you.
Oh, wow. Carmen, it's such an honor to have you here. You and I have worked together for a few years now with Les Brown and Dr. John Tallarico, and I think Dr. Pamela Henkel as well.
Mhm.
You've done some work with her, and I know we've been in at least one book together, The Greatness in You by John Tallarico and Les Brown. And you've just done another recent book as well, but we'll get back to that in a second. I want to know more about you. Don't be nervous. This is just like we're sitting in each other's lounge room having a cup of coffee together.
Correct. All right.
You have such an incredible story, and some of our story is a little parallel, but I'm not going to share that. I'm going to leave that to you. But Carmen, can you tell us a little bit more about you? Yeah, give us a little bit more about you, and then I'll dive into some questions together.
All right. Well, let's see. That was an amazing introduction, by the way. Thank you. That pretty much just summed up what I am about, right? Like what I do, which is like I love writing. We'll get more to that story in a little bit, how my desire for writing started. And but I would have never thought in a million years that I would become a best-selling author or an author, or that I would have published anything whatsoever, because as you mentioned earlier, English was not my first language, it was my second language. And so I thought that if I ever wrote anything one day, it would be probably in Spanish. But I have been in the country for 25 years, so now I feel that some of that Spanish that I used to speak back then is practically gone, considering the fact that I speak more English in here, yet I still have an accent, as you can hear. And so I feel like I'm not from here and I'm not from there. Like my English is not from here, but my Spanish is not from there. I'm like in that between subcategory, if you may. So I think that was one of like the very first self-limiting beliefs that I had to overcome to be here today. Because how many times like don't we tell ourselves, like we tell this story, right, to ourselves, like. And so the story that I used to tell myself, it was who will want to listen to somebody who first can't master the language English, like the English language, right? Or who would want to listen to a Latina who was, let's say, without a PhD, or right, like who would want to care for that. And part of my story, as I explain in two books that I have written so far, anthologies, is that it talks about pretty much just like the struggle of just getting to be comfortable in my own skin, knowing the fact that I have made some mistakes in my life, right? I did certain things that I had no business doing, let's say. I will get more into it. And, it was part of the, I'm going to say, it's who made me me. It's like those things that I thought didn't qualify me are the actual things that qualify me to do what I'm doing today. It was the fact that I didn't speak English that qualifies me to share my story about that. It was the fact that I did what I did that got me in trouble. We'll go more into that again. And those were the things, right, that really qualified me. So, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Gee, I know that line. It sounds like a Les Brown line. That's my
Right.
story. I haven't heard that for a while.
Yeah. Like that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Yes. That's it.
So good. So good. You mentioned a couple of things there that really stood out to me. Number one, who would want to listen to you? That
Mhm.
is such a lie from the pit of hell that women have been hearing for centuries,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And there are so many potent messages from warrior women like you, like me, who have something to say, who have just been muzzled for most of their lives, and breaking through these barriers and these limiting beliefs that you mentioned as well. This is massive. It takes so much courage. And I know for you that fear was massive for you. I know fear dominated a lot of your life. And yet here you are today, 2 books, and sitting here with me having a conversation, sharing your story. So there is there is so much power in our voice, in our story, because our vulnerabilities and our stories, when we share them, it gives permission to other people to share theirs, right?
Mhm.
Because we can all look so perfect on the outside and people see us now and what we look like now and where we're at now, but they didn't see us 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. I'm not sure how old you are, but for me, at least 30 years ago, they didn't see me back then. So can you speak into that? Um, my first question for you is, how did fear dominate your life before your journey towards breaking free from it? And can you share some specific instances? But speak a little bit around what we've just discussed with the whole who would want to listen to me, and stepping out even though you were so frightened, and the barrier of the accent, the the accent difference.
Mhm. Yeah. Good loaded question. Where do I start? Okay. So, how I broke through that belief or that self-limiting belief, like I think that when you are we all have fears, right? We all have fears. And for me, it was people noticing my accent, but it was really not the accent that was my fear. It was the fear of being judged, right? There's like the subtle bottom, underneath fear that we all have. And normally it comes from like the fear of rejection or the fear of loneliness, right? Abandonment sort of thing. And I think that for me, it was important to be able to fit in and to be able to not feel different, not feel different, because my entire life I felt different, because my entire life I felt like I didn't fit in. I didn't grow up with mom or dad. And so it was the fear of rejection, the fear that I carried since a little girl, right? Being, just among siblings. And even though like I didn't grow up with my parents, it was my grandparents that raised me. And it was, just subtle kind of play among my aunts who we were all young, and to say like, well, that's not your real mom, or well, that's not your real dad. And like at a very young age, I had to learn this skill to hide it, to hide
Mm,
the fact that it bothered me, to hide the fact that it hurt me, to the fact that it was affecting me, to know that I didn't belong where I was being raised by the people that were raising me, right? And so I think that when you don't deal with that trauma as a little kid, you bring those traumas into your adulthood. And based on that, sometimes we don't even know like the decisions that we make. So the problem was not really the accent. The problem was the rejection. The problem was feeling left out, feeling less than, right? And so that answers that question. When did I overcome that fear? I still get insecure sometimes. I still, before I record something or when I hear my recordings, I get bothered by them. I feel like, oh my gosh, I sound like this or that. And so I have to catch myself and I have to retrain my brain to say, well, I sound different to myself because I only hear myself on recordings, right? I'm not actually, when I'm speaking, I'm not actually listening to myself. I'm paying attention to what I'm saying. However, the other person who's receiving the output of my mouth, they know how I sound. They know the weird words or the way that I pronounce things. So for them, it's not a big deal. It's only for me because it's something new to me, right? And so one of the ways that I practice that is that I listen to the recordings that I hate the most about something that I explain, and I listen to them, even though I cringe sometimes at how I say things or how I explain things, and or sometimes watching the recordings and the faces that I make, and I'm just like, do I really sound like that and look like that? No wonder people will not listen to me, or right?
wow.
But I have to look at them again. And then the more I look at them, the more I am okay with it. And the more I fall in love with it. And the more I realize that it's not about how I sound, it's about the message, right? And it's about understanding that I'm not for everybody, just how everybody is not for me. And that the ears that are ready to listen to whatever I have to say are going to open regardless of how I sound, regardless of how I look, regardless of my past, right?
Mm.
I think it answers that question. What was the other thing that you mentioned? How, what?
Oh, can you share some specific instances when you made choices based on fear? I didn't actually finish asking that question because it felt like such a mouthful initially for you.
No worries.
But we can just stop there for a second. We can pick that up in a minute. But for the record, I actually really like your accent. And it's really interesting. When I was young, I used to think Americans had this really cool accent, and we as Australians didn't have one. But then, so young, so young and innocent and naive. But being around so many Americans and Hispanic and South, what do you call them, African Americans, like you just learn to embrace so many different accents from around the globe, and you speak beautifully.
Thank you.
You really do. And I understand and relate to going back and watching yourself and hearing yourself, because when we hear ourselves speak, we actually hear ourselves, I think it's through our bones or something like that. And it's a little bit different when we actually go back and listen to something and we experience how people actually hear us. And it is two different things. But a little bit of trivia for you. But thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your story. I think you really do speak beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah. So can you share some specific instances where you made choices based on fear?
Whew, loaded question, but very good question. I think that my entire life,
Yeah.
my entire life, all the choices that I have made have been mainly out of fear. And
Mm,
going back to that fear of rejection, that fear of somebody being mad at me, that fear, but at the end of the right, like the core of somebody being mad at me, like say no because, oh, what if somebody gets mad? It's rejection, right? Because what happens if they get mad at you? Then they'll reject you. So I think that for me the biggest fear has been rejection. And with that, anything that you can think of, I mean, from probably dating the wrong person that I didn't want to date, saying yes because, well, what if I say no? Then it'll make me look bad, right? Or I'll be like a bad person if I say no. Or perhaps saying, like, getting in trouble with my friends, right? We're gonna get deeper, or I think we're gonna have more of the conversation of my past addiction, right? So it was
Yeah,
also
go as deep as you like here. We can start going deep now. It's a good time.
okay. All right, thank you. So yeah, so I think that that was kind of like the biggest thing, right? One, being true to our story, being true to myself, being when I came to the United States, I came to the United States to finally reunite with my mom, to live with my mom and whatnot. And even though there's like a deep story behind it, that it will take a whole session to talk about it, just reuniting with my mom at the age of 15 was a little bit difficult, but obviously, like, I had no choice because I was underage. However, I couldn't really articulate my feelings. And I think that I said yes to a lot of things to make her happy, to please her, to, right, to be that daughter that I thought she wanted, or to fit in again, because I don't want to be rejected by this woman who is my mom and who my grandma picture as if she was like this grand persona, right? Which she is. But at that point, she didn't really seem much like it because she was going through also her own, you're right, her own problems. And so was I. So here we are, two broken people trying to make it work, right? But for me, like, I just took took everything in and I just held it all in. So what happens when I did that, I was afraid that she would reject me if I told her how I really felt, right? And so I allowed that to pile up and pile up and pile up. And I'm not sure if you can, or a lot of you, if you're watching, how that feels, right? You are not comfortable with something, but yet you hold it in and you just pile up thing after thing without actually speaking about it, without be speaking your truth, because you're afraid of something, right? Of making things worse, or making whatever it is, the outcome is usually that fear of drama, of trouble, or being called, oh my gosh, you're such a drama queen, or you are whatever it is, fill in the blank. So
And plus,
that,
sorry, and plus you've already had a lifetime without your mum, and then when you come into the moment when you're with your mum, you don't want to risk losing that again either. So did that play a
yeah,
part? Yeah.
love
Wow.
that. That's a really good observation that I didn't really consider. But yeah, so you want to just be loved, period, right? You don't want to continue to feel hurt and whatnot. But what happens when that doesn't have, like, actually work out the way that you do, right? Then you continue to try to blend in, because unfortunately, that age that I was brought into this country was a very pivotal age for me, right? I am a teenager. I'm starting to learn how to find myself. Like, who am I in this world? Like, who am I in my country? But more so now, I'm here in a different country. I don't speak the language. I'm being bullied in school, being called names because I don't speak the language, right? And so, who am I, right? And so that it's pretty much living through my fear, because I don't want to be rejected, but yet I am being rejected. And the people that look like me, they don't want to talk to me because I don't sound like them. And they're embarrassed to be seen around people who don't speak the language, right? Because we have a name here. Or, so it's like, it's a very difficult like time in my life. And then so what happens when Carmen goes through that, right? She meets a group of friends that love to party, who are the cool kids, right? Because nobody picks on them. They speak English, they have cars, they come from good families, they are living a different lifestyle than I never lived before. And next thing you know, they are getting high somewhere. And so for me, knowing and hearing my grandma in the background, right? You can't be blah, blah, blah. Drugs are bad, this is what's gonna happen. You can die, right? But what happens when I have that first hit?
Mm.
Everything just changed, right? Because I thought, wow, this is the relief that I was looking for. Suddenly, under the influence of meth, right? I didn't feel resentment towards my mom anymore. And suddenly, like all those feelings that I had just vanished, right? And so I thought, and so it was the fear also of saying no to a group of friends that had pretty much brought me in, right? Made me feel loved, made me feel accepted, made me feel something that I was really seeking. Like, even though I wasn't seeking that from my friends, I was seeking that from my parents, right? I got it. At the end of the day, like, I ended up getting it in the wrong place. So, nothing against them and not to blame them or anything, right? Because it was my choice at the end of the day. But regardless, that's pretty much what led me to it, right? Once I did that, it was game on because I didn't look back and I thought that I was doing something good because I just finally felt ready to speak to my mom. But at the same time, I was just becoming addicted to something that I didn't know was so hard to quit. And, from there on, it was like just spiraled down. Yeah.
So how long were you addicted to meth?
So my active years, because it started, it progresses, right? So I tried it, I liked it, but it was kind of like an occasional thing. I'm gonna say that I started at the age of 18, messing around with other party drugs like ecstasy and weed. Other little drugs, cocaine, stuff like that. But it was never an actual habit to do it every day. It would just be kind of like a weekend thing every now and then at a rave and whatnot. And I think that towards my 19th year, I started using it more because one day we smoked like one Friday and I had to be at work on Sunday or something. And so I couldn't sleep that Friday night because it just keeps you up. And then so that Saturday I couldn't even sleep. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, like I just could not go to sleep. And then so here we are. It's time for me to show up on Sunday. So at this point my body's already getting so tired. And what did I do? I had to get high again so then that I would be able to last until Sunday. And it became like a once a month thing. And next thing you know, it was like, okay, let's do it every weekend. And at that point, I was in a very unhealthy relationship. And this person, he seemed to really like it a lot more than I did. And so at that point, I'm not living at my mom's anymore. Long story there, but I'm living on my own. I'm renting an apartment, not an apartment, but like a room at a friend's house. And I'm paying this out of my own work, right? I'm working two jobs. And so what happens when I come to my room to rest, then there will be my ex with friends, right? Getting high in there. And it was kind of like I was afraid, but I was more afraid to say no. I was more afraid to be left out. I was more afraid that these are my friends and these are the people that cost me a lot of sweat and tears to be a part of. And now if I don't do that, then here I am again, right? Back to square one, being rejected. Now I don't have a mom, and imagine me not having my friends, God forbid, right? And then I'm at that phase where it's just like so complicated from like my 19th year, right? And I'm
Mhm.
barely learning the language because remember, I just came like when I was like 15, right?
Yeah.
Mad chaos, but there I was, just getting more and more addicted into this nightmare
Mhm.
that, I mean, I think that was like the hardest or the biggest fear that brought me like huge consequences, right? And anything
Mm.
after that, right? Like I said, just even like sometimes going to a place where you don't want to go, but you say yes. Hiring someone that you necessarily don't need their services, but you actually do it because you're you have the fear of missing out on what they can do for you, or purchasing that course that you're like, well, they promised that I was gonna make $1,000 by the end of the course. So if I don't, but the course is like $2,000, and you're like, I could do it, right? So there's fear of a lot of things, you know.
There's so much fear of around a lot of things. And one of the things that this makes me think about actually is betrayal of self. Because in a
Mhm.
lot of those instances that you just spoke about, so in reference to not speaking your truth to your mum because you didn't want to be rejected, and then your friends as well, having them in your room when you wanted to rest but not wanting to be alone. So in these moments, you're betraying yourself first and foremost to accommodate this fear of rejection and a fear of being alone. And yeah, just there's so much in that. But I love how you also just brought in the aspect of fear around FOMO, or fear of missing out, even when it comes to a course and bettering yourself because someone said it's going to be great. You're so on point. There are so many elements and so many places of fear that we give into and betray ourselves. But um, so this is a lot of fear of man, is what I'm hearing. A lot of fear of man and a lot of fear of rejection. So, I mean, that's a really heavy path, and I know there's more to that story because we had a conversation before before we started recording, and there's one thing that I really want to touch on. For some reason, I feel like it's really important, and then we can kind of bounce out of it and come to the light, so to speak. Well, there's two things actually. Number one, you ended up incarcerated. I
Mhm.
assume, correct me if I'm wrong, I assume, and you can elaborate, you that was around the drug time.
Mhm.
But number two, you've bounced out of this pit somehow and found Jesus at some point. And also, you have this incredible life now that, irrespective of where you came from, you've just made this incredible life. And you, like I said earlier, you're only just scratched the surface, or barely scratched the surface, because you're still so young and vibrant and got so much time ahead of you. So we pray. So can you tell us about those two things?
Of course, yes. So regarding the incarceration, it was because I was driving with a friend and we got pulled over, and I happened to, this is the first godly intervention in my life. There were many godly interventions, but this was the one where I think I was doing really bad in my addiction, and I feel that there was just a an intervention of Jesus, God, and all his angels, girl, where he was just like, girl, you are about to die, like for real, like you need, let me send these cops to get you because you're like just getting out of hand. And when we got pulled over, the person that was driving, right, like my friend, we used to get high together, so that kind of friend, he mentioned, as we got pulled over, I don't exactly know what the conversation the police officer was having with him, and he stepped out of the car and they're having this conversation back there. He had no license or something. So then the police officer comes, and I had some, like I had like a small portion of meth in my cigarettes. I hid it there when I saw we were getting pulled over. So then the police officer asked me to step out of the car and came back directly to get the cigarettes. So then I assumed that the guy, right, must have told them. So at that point, when that happened, they said, whose is it? Obviously, I said, well, it's mine, obviously, right? Because if not, somebody else is gonna take the fall because it's his car and whatnot. And at that point, I was already tired. I was already tired of getting high. I was already tired of my addiction. I was already broken. I was like, I was just so broken at that point. The only thing that was left of me was like my body, like my skin, but everything else inside of me was already shattered. And when I got arrested, I just remember crying my whole way to jail. And it was just like the very first time I think that I felt me again. Because, like I mentioned earlier, I numbed myself with drugs, and drugs were not the problem. It was my behavior. It was all the resentment and all the hurt that I had in me, and so I think that just being in jail, which I wasn't there for long, I was there for probably for like 3 4 days, but just being in there, and I write a little bit about this in the book, The Next Best You. I write about a specific moment that it was a turning point where something just clicked. I was sitting in the bus, the sheriff's bus that takes you to or from court, from jail to court or from court to jail. And so I don't recall exactly if I am going to court or I am coming back to court. But this specific thing happens. I'm sitting there, I'm handcuffed to another inmate. She's in really bad shape. The bus reeks of body odor. It's smelly. Everybody's not doing good. I'm not doing good myself. I'm there. I'm dressed in the jail uniform. I'm sitting there. I'm looking out the window and I see a couple holding hands, waiting for the bus to fully stop so they can cross the street. And and that did something in me. I'm looking at them crossing the street, and then I finally lose sight of them. And at that point, there was like this huge paradox. I said, oh my gosh, how lovely it is to feel loved, how lovely it is to give love, right? How lovely it is to just be out there, right? Like how they were. And they were obviously oblivious at the fact that I was looking at them, and that I don't even know where these people are today. But to just have seen that act of love, how much I desire that, how much I didn't want to be in the bus. Like I knew I was more than that, like made for more than that, that I was better than that. But yet there I was sitting, and the paradox comes into where the shackles is was pretty much keeping me free. You right? Is what was keeping me free from my addiction. It was the bus that felt like I was trapped, that was keeping me sober, right? And so I thought for a second, I said, and if I go back out there, what's out there for me again? My addiction? Drugs, the same type of friends, right? Like what's out there for me? What I knew I didn't like in there, but I just didn't know how to change. I didn't know how to change that behavior. And at this point, Dr. Angela, I really think that it was my mom's prayers, because at some point into me moving out of the house because we had an issue, and my mom just seeing me so lost in drugs, right? And not just that, but then my little sister followed after. And so there, my mom was dealing with a big problem in her hands. Two of her daughters are going down the drain really fast. And in my mom's desperation, my mom seeked Jesus, and my mom started going to church. And I know that my mom started to pray. And I don't know what was happening in my mom's life at that point, because I was doing my own thing, but it was my mom's prayers. It was my mom's prayers that I feel when I felt that calling, when seeing those. And I'm gonna get so emotional because what else could it be,
Yeah.
right? Like I didn't have the desire to stop. Like I remember people asking me, like, are you ever gonna quit? And I didn't want to quit. I said, no, I'm not gonna quit. I'm gonna die overdosing or something, because for me it was better to feel that. It was better not to be around, right? But instead, somehow I just got the strength, and I got out of the bus. Obviously, I don't recall what happens after. I just remember that specific scene, And I got out of jail, and I remember they gave me a program. And so that program they gave me, it was drug court, the best program that California had at that point, because it was very long. It was like a year-long program.
Wow.
And that's pretty much where one of the biggest turning points of my life was when I started going to rehab and sitting there in a group meeting, and I was gonna say a coach, but a counselor asking a bunch of us who wants to get sober, and a lot of people raised their hands, and I didn't raise my hand, and then so she said, okay, for those who didn't lift their hands, like who wants to just keep getting high? And I raised my hand, and she's like, why do you want to keep getting high? And then I said, because I just don't know how to stay stop. I don't know how to stop. I know how to get started, but I don't know how to stop. And I said, and she said, well, what is it going to take for you to stop? And I said, a miracle, or it's going to take for me to just die. And she's like, well, there's three stops when you are addicted, right? It's jails, is an institution, or it's death. I know how to already been to jail. I was already in an institution, right? In rehab. But the next one was death, right?
Wow.
And people would come to rehab when I was there. And there was this lady, this girl who she used to follow me everywhere because I was the only nice person to her. But she didn't really speak Spanish. She spoke a dialect from Guatemala. And so the little Spanish that she spoke, and because I had this really thick accent, people would like say like, oh, so and so's calling you. So then anyway, so we became really good friends, and she had some people from church that would come, and they will pray for her. And she one time she invited me, but I was so embarrassed. I was like, here goes fear of rejection, right? Where these addicts here in rehab gonna think about me? And so I said, whatever, F it, pray for me. And then they all got into a circle, and then they were praying for me. And one of them gave me a Bible, and I'm like, whatever, I'm never gonna read it. I was just trying to be nice. I took it. I still have it, by the way. I haven't really read it because it's in Spanish. It's so hard to understand because it's like the old school Spanish. But I kept it, and I just felt something, and they will come and they will pray for me. And people will walk by and they will look at these two like creeps, quote unquote, being surrounded by all these people praying for them, right? And I should just be like, oh my gosh, people are praying for me, like hide me, right? Um, but it worked. You know what? It worked. And that was a proof. That was like one of the main things that I'm like, prayer works, period. Prayer works. Bottom line, I don't care what people say, prayer works. Because if prayer
Amen.
saves a life, it can save anybody's.
Yeah, amen, sis. I agree. I agree. Far out. There was so much in that. You nearly had me in tears. There is, the unrelenting and unfailing love of God that
Amen.
calls us home all the time, just never lets us go. And his arms are always open wide, waiting for us to come into him.
Yeah.
And he's not standing there with a big stick waiting to punish us or yell at us or, scream us down. He's actually there waiting.
Amen. Oh my goodness. Yes. And you know what? My pastor says very often, he says, God never moves. God is always there. So if you don't feel him around, it's because you have moved, right? All you need to do is get back to it. Going back to my mom's prayers, right? My mom became a woman of prayer and will bring everything down to her, like on her knees, prayer.
We
And
love our prayer warrior mama bears. Like, we need them in our lives.
amen. Seriously, yes. And then she got my sister involved in church before she got me. Now my sister is younger. And they would pray for me and they would invite me to church events. And I would just be like, roll my eyes. Okay, I'll be there just to be nice, right? That was a good fear, though, a good fear of rejection. Because I was like, hey, I'm having a good relationship with my mom and And my sister, I don't want to mess that up. So I will be there, right? And it took a while, right? Because it takes a while to build a new paradigm, it takes a while to build a new habit. And don't think that once I got out of jail that I didn't relapse. I must have relapsed probably like, I don't know, 10 times more or something, and one
Thank you for sharing.
overdose. Um,
Wow. Thanks for
yeah.
sharing. I think that's really important to share as
w-
well, 'cause not just a clean, often not a clean break. Yeah.
No, and it was a trial and error, right? Like, try it again. Here goes, I made a mistake. Try it again. Made a mistake. End up in at the ER. Woke up. I'm never gonna get high again. I got high again. I'm never gonna get high again. I got high again. And it was kind of like a little ping pong ball, right?
Mm.
Until one day in 2008, I came to my senses and I said, okay, okay. I was almost dead last year.
Wow.
What am I doing with my life? This is not a game. I'm either going to do it and that's it, get away from my family, hide, go die somewhere, right? Or just do it. And it was kind of like that conversation that I had. So one mistake took me to another, to another, to another. My family invited me to church, me going there sometimes, and I started to drink. And then one day, one of my friends, I was like at a very low point of my life where my depression had just kicked in, because remember, now I'm feeling the emotions, I'm not getting high anymore. And suddenly it's Carmen versus Carmen, and Carmen does not like the real Carmen, right? And it's hard to be face to face with that person that you're trying to avoid, and it's all the feelings. And then one night on a Wednesday, May 2nd, 2012, I think it was, one of my friends called me. She was having a hard time with something personal, and I was having a hard time that night. And she said, do you want to go to church with me? And then I said, oh, let's go to church on a Wednesday. I don't even care. And I went. And that was like the best decision of my life, because when the pastor asked, we have an invitation at the end of the service, which is like to close our eyes, to bow our head down, and to raise our hands for those who know that they're really going to heaven because they're saved, they have accepted Jesus Christ in their heart. And there is also, like, without embarrassing anybody, if anyone can just quickly lift up their hand, so that the pastor knew who wasn't sure if they knew they were going to go to heaven, right? And so I raised my hand real quick and I put it back down, because I'm like, God forbid somebody sees me. Ooh, they're not gonna like me again, right? And so at the end of the service, he approached me and he said, can I ask you something? Like, if you were to die today, do you know for sure that you are on your way to heaven? And I said, I'm going straight to hell, like, for sure. Then he said, well, is it okay if I show you from the Bible that you know that for sure you are on your way to heaven? And then so I said, okay, let's make an appointment. So I did it for Cinco de Mayo 2012. And I could have been out there partying, drinking. But instead, what I did, I went to his office. I took my now husband with me. And then I said, okay, I'm ready to hear whatever you have to say. And so he read some parts of the Bible, right, where it says that if you accept Jesus in your heart, right, that you do go to heaven, and then that, the wages of sin is death and the lake of fire, and that for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son. And then he gave me a verse to memorize, which is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, I think, which it says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. And so I held on to that verse through my walk, or through my now new faith. And just things started to change. I used to be a heavy smoker, and suddenly I decided to quit cigarettes, to stop smoking. And I said, how can I stop? And I started doing the same habit again. I will smoke, I will stop, I will smoke, I will stop. I changed brands. And then one day I said, okay, we've been through this before, Carmen. Are you going to stop, or are you going to keep going? Keep going, get cancer, and die, but don't bother anybody. Go cry and feel sorry for yourself somewhere far. But if you're going to stay for good, then stop. right? Because it was bothering me so much. So I prayed. I said, Lord, please, if you are real and like for real, you're there, I need you, because that's the way I speak to Jesus, okay? He speaks my language. And so I said, you have to just help me. I can't, obviously, help me. And then so it was a Tuesday, October 2013, that I don't remember exact date, but it was a Tuesday, 2018, I mean 2013 in October, where I said, okay, this is gonna be my last cigarette. It was my last cigarette on my pack. And I remember I lit the cigarette and here I am smoking outside of my house. And then I was like, how petty and ridiculous. Seriously? Why why does it matter? I remember I stepped on it. I'm like, no more, that's it. Was it hard? 100%, right? Because you're so used to it. And I used to work with smokers, so sometimes like people around me will be like, yeah, right, you're gonna relapse again, here we go, there's a pack, I bought you a pack. And I would just be like, I'm going to prove you. Just for today, I am not going to smoke. And then the next day will come. Just for today, I am not going to smoke. And I remember the first 21 days I didn't smoke a cigarette. And I said, Lord, it's been 21 days. I don't want to throw them away. Please just give me the strength not to smoke for today. I really need a cigarette. I really feel like I just make me feel grossed out by it, because I used to drink, eat, and then smoke. And so I would go out with friends, and if I would have a beer, I wanted to smoke, or we would go out and eat. I wanted to smoke afterwards. And I remember something that somebody said in rehab, a counselor. She said, pair it up with a bad memory
Yeah.
and convince yourself that that is it. And so I remember those hungover mornings that I used to be just so hungover with a bad headache, and we used to go outside and smoke a cigarette. And I'm like, that. And
Yeah.
so the same thing I did with drinking. I said, ew, drinking and smoking makes me feel so nasty. I don't want to do it anymore. And so I began to not drink, like look forward to the drinking over the weekend. I mean, for the weekend, right? And so that's pretty much how I lost my habits, that
Mm.
were so destructive in drinking. Now, do I have a beer every now and then? I do, just for a beer, whatever. It doesn't
Yeah.
really bother me anymore. But cigarettes, nothing at all, because I know that cigarettes is no, they're very addictive. So I
Yeah.
just, you know. But yeah, that's pretty much my story of how I came to know Jesus, how I came to change my life around. My husband got saved with me that day, and then we ended up getting married. Now we have a beautiful family. We have a little girl, she's 6, and I have a business. I am coaching people. I'm writing books. I love writing. That's for me the best outlet with no judgment, right? When I'm the most scared, it's like my notepad and my pen are always there to listen to me with zero judgment. And I'm able to go back later on and reflect on what I wrote, or see almost like the growth, right? When I read the journals that I used to write a year ago, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that I used to feel this way. And so I'm able to actually see the exponential growth that I've done, and now I try to encourage people to write, just to write, right? To write your story. And I host workshops about writing, because I just want people to, maybe because it was such a therapeutic tool for me. And I really feel that writing was, there's no judgment in writing, period, right? Because again, a lot of us are afraid that even if we go to a psychologist, the psychologist is not going to understand, right? Because they haven't been through it. They tell us their opinion based on like a clinical point of view, or because they know the brain so well and whatnot. But do you really understand what I'm going through based on what I just explained to you, right? Because I've been in therapy forever. And so it was really to just writing. Like I don't even know how many notepads, like full, like stacked up. I'm gonna sell them one day. I'll be like, here, you wanna know the story of Carmen? Here. This is raw material right here.
So amazing. And there's something about pen on paper. There's just something therapeutic about it. You're right. We need to wrap up. You have an amazing story, and it's been incredible hearing your journey from, where you once were to now where you are, and the parts in between. And so often there's a Jesus involved moment that just transforms the entire trajectory of someone's life. If there was something, first of all, thank you for sharing your vulnerabilities and your transparency with us. It's so beautiful. And if there was something that you would leave our listeners with today, and I'll put your contact information in the write-up, but if there's something that you would leave our listeners with today, what would it be?
I'm sorry, repeat the question again.
If there was something that you would leave with our listeners today, so a saying, a quote, a inspirational blurb, something that you would say.
It will be that Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which is trust in the Lord with all thine heart, And when all means all, that's exactly what it means, right? It doesn't say trust in the Lord with some of your heart, with a little bit of your heart, with with a borrowed heart, right? It says trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. So don't try to make sense of it, right? Just lean into him, like trust him that he's gonna get it done, right? In all thy ways acknowledge him, thank him, right? In everything that you do, be grateful, right? It's one of the highest vibrations, gratitude, right? So be grateful for everything, even through the trials. He's leading you through it, right? Not You're not by yourself, like you're going with him, right? So just trusting in the Lord with all thine heart and leaning not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways, so your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall, that's a promise, direct thy paths, right? So he will direct you in the way that you're supposed to go. But the first requirement is like that you need to trust them with all your heart. And that's my message for you.
Wow. Mic drop. Boom, baby. That was so amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Carmen. You're an absolute joy. You're a ray of sunshine. You're a breath of fresh air. And I just thank God for you and for our connection.
I agree. I agree. And I feel the same way about you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor. And I really hope that whoever is listening out there, like not to give up, and really that when we are, when we're going to that trial is because we're looking down, but the answer is up. So thank you.
That's right. And if God hasn't taken us out of a situation, He's going to lead us through.
100%. Yes. And
Mm.
oh, so
Amen.
heartfelt. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if you know of someone who needs to hear this story today, this incredible story of powerless to powerful and transformation and all the things that come along with this, please share this story with your friends. Until next time, thank you for joining us at Powerless to Powerful. Enjoy your afternoon. Follow Angela on Facebook and LinkedIn at Angela Bennett, on Instagram at angieb_transformations, or visit angieb.com.au. And remember, your past does not define you, it refines you.